are so blessed at God's faithfulness. We have prayed for Louisa since before she was born because she's a little younger than Nathan. And we just found out her name, last year, I guess, what her name was. So we are just so blessed to have her be a part of our family and Nathan to be a part of her family as well. Well, actually, I'm not going to share quite as much about my ministry. I'll share a little bit, but there's some other things I want to share. First of all, how can I stand here and not take the opportunity to share a few pictures of Nate? We call him Nathan. So, here's Nathan. So, Nathan, I started looking through pictures and I found some themes that were going on. Like this one, he was always into something. Something on his face, something he was eating, or maybe my lipstick. Okay. Another thing is he always had something on his head. If it wasn't a hat, he made it a hat. Third, whenever he could get the guitar in his hand, he was playing. This is his first guitar. Fourth, he often served with us and our family in different ministries we either started or were involved in. 5, as he got older, he began to do ministry on his own, helping in the community with his youth group. And 6, he loved sharing his faith with others. This is a picture of Nathan in California, speaking to a homeless man and sharing his faith with Christ, about Christ. I remember another story that seems very fresh in my mind. A few years ago, Nathan was driving to our home from college, and he was praying that God would give him the opportunity to share Christ with someone because he was in a Christian school, went to church, had Christian friends all around him, but no opportunity to share with non-believers. And as he was praying and driving to our house on a cold winter night, he lost control of his truck, and it went into the middle of the road between the lanes and rolled. And about an hour from our house, the ambulance came, the police came, everyone was surprised he was alive. The police even told me no one has ever survived an accident like he had. But Nathan, he's okay. God protected him. He only had some cuts and blood, and the truck rolled over and smashed. But he was okay. God protected him. And Nathan, when he got into the police car to drive to the station to wait for us to come and get him, he knew that was the person God had given the opportunity to share. So I said, you have to be careful how you pray. Sometimes God answers right away. Sometimes later, you don't know how he's going to answer prayer. But he does. But I'm so proud of my son that he prayed that, and he recognized the opportunity, and he took it, and he shared with the police officer on the way to the station. I could share many stories about you. I'll tell you a couple funny ones. When Nathan was in kindergarten, I would come to school and pick him up and find out he was in the principal's office because he was in trouble. And this happened a lot. Well, then he told me years later, he said, Mom, school was boring, but I knew if I went to the principal's office, he would give me candy. So I got in trouble as often as I could. His kindergarten teacher learned that long after he'd finished college, I think. And I said, now you know why. He was such a troublemaker. And then there was the night where Valerie was not in her room yet to go to bed, but Nathan snuck upstairs and hid in her room in the dark. And when she came up to go to bed, she reached around the corner to turn the light on, and he grabbed her arm and pulled her into the room. Of course, she screamed. And we were asleep. We woke up, ran upstairs to find out what just happened. Did someone just get killed? But he was always doing fun things like that. But then there was another moment that I want to share, kind of a simple moment that I had with Nathan. When he was a teenager, well, all through his life, when they were ready for bed, I would come up and we would have time to talk and share about the day. And this particular night before he went to sleep, he was very deep in thought. And he said to me, "You know, Mom, you have been a pretty good parent. After all, I'm turning out to be a great kid." Of course, my heart was like, "Oh, that's so sweet of him." But before I could become too proud, he said, "Actually, it was all God." I've always remembered that profound statement from my son because he's right. Even though we certainly tried to be good parents, it was ultimately God and Nathan's surrender to him. It reminded me that each of us, everything that we do individually, as our family, is all because of God. He has been transforming us, me, for many, many years. He's still working because he has a lot of work to do. So as believers, how does he work in our lives and transform us? How do we go from where we were to where we are to really where we want to be? How do we begin to look more like Jesus, to love more like Jesus, and even parent in a way that brings him honor and glory? It has everything to do with our surrender to him and our obedience. As long as I can remember, I've loved Jesus and I wanted to serve him. But it wasn't until he asked me to do something I didn't understand that I really began to live for him. I had been teaching a women's Bible study for many years. I loved it. I felt like God was teaching me so much by teaching others. And I loved sharing in the lives of other women. People even told me it was my gifting. I was very involved in women's ministry and evangelism in our church. But then one day, God asked me to step away from it all. I said, "What?" I don't think I heard him correctly. Surely he didn't ask me to stop teaching the Bible. I mean, after all, it was my gifting. Why would he ask me to step away? I didn't know if I actually heard him correctly. I fought with him for about a year while I was still teaching, until it just became so clear in my heart he really was asking me to step down. So I decided to obey him, even though I was probably kicking and screaming the whole time at him. Well, 3 months later, he allowed me to see what he was doing. He had been preparing me for other things, the next thing he wanted me to do. He was opening up new opportunities in ministry that I would not have been available to if I had still been doing all the things that I had been doing, which were all good and things he had wanted me to do. He gave me long-time desires of my heart by working first with disaster relief after a hurricane hit one of our states in the U.S., and then with an orphan ministry in countries like Central African Republic, Cambodia, and Thailand. Those were all places I wanted to go. And God was actually giving me some of the desires of my heart by providing ministries in those countries. Also on this path he had me on, he allowed me to meet a young Hill tribe lady named Fa. She had been severely abused by her father as a child and almost sold into the sex slave trade. But she was rescued out of that life and introduced to Jesus Christ, and she desired to impact other children like herself. So with a team of other believers from our church in 2009, we started a ministry called Grow. We have rescued 32 children who have been severely abused, either physically, sexually, neglect, and have been able to house them on our campus We've been able to heal them, introduce Jesus Christ to them. We work with families too, and 7 of the families have been restored, where their children are now back together in healthy relationships, and where the families learn about Jesus. And because the families are impacted, communities are being changed and impacted for Christ. It's very exciting. So today I have the privilege of serving as executive director of Grow. It is full-time. Nathan said part-time. It's full-time for me now. And twice a year, part-time, I travel to Thailand, and I get to see the lives of these children change from hopelessness to having hope. And guess what? I get to teach the Bible. I have opportunities to share in women's groups in Hill Tribe churches in northern Thailand, as well as teach the children. Together with all of our supporters, we are rewriting these children's futures. This is a picture of our campus. Our homes are full, and we are trusting God to help us be able to build new homes so we can rescue more children. We have over 120 children on our waiting list who we have identified that they need to be rescued. And we are trusting God to help us to reach those children before they suffer anymore. So please, I invite you to pray with us as we seek to rescue these children and continue to trust God to use this ministry not only in the lives of children, but to change the families and the communities in which they live. It was also during this time in our life, when this was all happening, that Tim, my husband, began to obey Jesus' calling in his life with the work in the Central African Republic. But I'm going to let him share about that next week. So come back and hear the rest of the story. Our children were in elementary and middle school, and we began to encourage them to have their own mentor, somebody who could pour into them their life experience with Jesus Christ and encourage them in their faith. And they did that. We encouraged them to be involved in ministry and to grow their faith, and they did. This is one of my favorite family photos because everybody in this picture in my family is wearing a shirt from a ministry that they were involved in. So there's Nathan, sorry, I call him Nathan. He's wearing a gray shirt from our church. He was interning at our church. The next is Alex. We adopted her as a teenager, and she worked in a ministry in New York, in inner city. Myself, I have my Grow shirt. My husband, Tim, with his Africa shirt. Our daughter, Valerie, and she worked in a ministry in another city, Philadelphia, in the U.S., inner city. And our son, Zach, has a shirt on from a ministry in Haiti. So I love this picture because it fills my heart's desire to see my children serve the Lord wherever they are and however they are being gifted by God. But how did we get there? As Nathan said, it was all God. When we surrendered and obeyed, He works and transforms. But He didn't stop there with just asking us to surrender and obey. He did want us to be good parents, great parents, only not for our glory, but for His. Something else I needed to learn. We began to look at the end result when our kids were younger. Where do we want our family to be? This was very important to keep in mind because I know it's hard to believe looking at Nathan, but we didn't have perfect kids. And we weren't perfect parents. We certainly had our days, our arguments, our fights, and lots of words. But parenting, after all, if you're parents, you know, isn't easy. But we had a goal. Our goal was to do everything we could do to give the best opportunity for our kids to become adults who love Jesus with all of their hearts and desire to serve Him wherever they are. We prayed that daily and kept that goal in sight. We searched for God's wisdom because we knew we were going to need it. One verse in the Bible stuck out to me more than others. And it wasn't the verse, spare the rod, spoil the child, or children, obey the Lord, or all discipline seems unpleasant for the season. No, it wasn't those verses. It was Psalm 127, 4 and 5. It says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full. Now, I used to think that meant people who had 5 children were the happiest because a quiver full is 5 arrows, right? But Solomon was getting at a much more important principle, the idea of children being arrows. God gives us our children so we can prepare them for his mission. I used to think the verse was talking about the blessings of having children, which there are many. But as our children got older, I realized it's more about launching them from our home. After all, what are arrows for? They are purposed to be shot. And where are arrows generally shot? At the enemy. Okay, wait a minute, Lord. All of our lives, we try to protect our children, take good care of them, keep them safe, free from harm. And now you want us to launch them to the enemy? Oh, well, they are purposed to be shot. Missionary Jim Elliot wrote to his parents, remember how the psalmist described children? He said they are arrows. What are arrows for but to shoot? So with the strong arms of prayer, draw back the bowstring and let those arrows fly, all of them, straight at the enemy's host. He wrote this in a letter to his parents before giving his own life for the gospel in Ecuador. And then Reggie Joyner, in a book called Parenting Beyond Your Capacity, wrote these words. We're fine if our children never climb mountains, as long as it guarantees they will never get hurt. But what if your children are for mountains? The ultimate mission of a family is not to protect your children from all harm, but to mobilize them for the mission of God. It is possible to hold on to our kids so tightly that we forget the ultimate goal of parenting is to let them go. Our children were designed to be shot like arrows. If we try to protect them from all life's challenges and dangers, we run the risk of never allowing them to see what faith is, of seeing something beyond themselves. We can't give them the idea of some boring faith that they don't really need. It must be alive and exciting, scary at times. Tim and I had to step out in our life in faith to be examples for our kids. We wanted to be examples that they would be excited to follow. We wanted to allow them to be in situations where they had to trust God, where they had to see us trust God, where we prayed and we saw God work and we saw him build their faith. We are to trust in the unseen during life's journey. Even when we cannot see one single step in front of us, we must put our trust in the invisible, even when the visible might discourage us. The definition of faith not only points to our being in faith, but also to our acting out in faith. We must be obedient to God's commands. Just believing and not acting on that faith really isn't faith at all. We must obey and exercise our faith. Without faith, Hebrews 11:6 says, "It is impossible to please God." A life of faith may seem risky, reckless. In reality, the risk is very small compared to the trustworthiness of God. Because of who God is, we can step out in faith, knowing that he is ready and to steady us. And as like a toddler trying to learn to walk, he's saying, "Come on, you can do it." He's saying that to us, and we have the opportunity to say that to others. So when we pull back the bowstring all the way, steady that arrow, aim right into enemy territory, and we launch that arrow, trusting completely that God will allow that arrow to hit its mark. That's what we need to do. Right now, for Nathan, that is here. People often ask us, how can you do that? How can you let him go to a foreign country? It's normal for all of you, right? But I say, instead, I ask, how can I not? If we fail to release him, what joy will we forfeit in eternity? For who might not be encouraged in their faith, or challenged, or strengthened in their walk? Who might not hear of the gospel of Jesus Christ if we don't let him come? We believe God is here to do what he has purposed him to do here. One day, we will be able to all rejoice together in eternity with you. And many people we don't know yet because they don't know Jesus yet. But one day, we will be with him all the time in eternity. So we can let him be here or wherever God is going to take them. Because one day we will be together rejoicing and celebrating what God has done. And we can give honor and glory to God. Well, I have shared a lot with you this morning, so I'm just going to summarize a few things. And then my husband, Tim, will pick up next week. Actually, he has no idea what I just told you. So first of all, if you are a parent, then be the model first. Then intentionally parent them toward God, knowing one day you will need to launch them at the enemy. Trust and obey God. It's also a part of that parenting. They're watching you. Live with the big picture in mind, eternity. What we do here is so we can celebrate even more there. And if you don't have children in your home, you can still find arrows. They might not be your own children. They might be other people God is asking you to step into their lives, like we did Alex. And remember, actually, it's all God.